Okay, Alan, we are live. Thanks for joining me on the show. As I typically do, why don't you take the floor to start us off? Go ahead and introduce yourself and give a little background on, you can even start all the way at the beginning of your career and then, at a high level, get to what you're building today.
Sure. Yeah. Pleasure, Connor, for having me on your podcast. Alan Cooper, co-president of Ancilla Ventures and CEO co-founder of ReadyList. I started my career out at Anderson Consulting, now kind of Accenture, kind of did more of the IT consulting route and eventually got my MBA and decided at that point, kind of focus on entrepreneurship and really just kind of had a passion for trying to just kind of lead my own destiny, kind of put the reins in my hands and see what I can do with it. And so I think I was a little bit motivated trying to do that with my MBA and was able to actually join a company that I kind of helped kind of fund a little bit from a working capital perspective. And that was Ancilla Partners, and joined that shortly after it kind of got started. When I realized I kind of wanted to work for a smaller company, and been there for 16 plus years. And shortly, 6 or 7 years later, we actually spun off another company called ReadyList based on a product that we built, and been kind of running that for the last 10 years and kind of more focused on the CEO aspect of that company for the last 2 or 3 years. So yeah, so it's been a fun ride. It's been fun to kind of see kind of the company grow, as well as kind of the people inside of it as well.
So, and I didn't know this off the top, but where did you get your MBA and what value did you derive from that?
I got at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I kind of focused on entrepreneurship. And when I was at Accenture, what I found myself is learning a lot on the fly. As you start to progress in your career, you're put in situations where you're kind of trying to get a few steps ahead of your clients. But I always found myself not being as knowledgeable as I'd like to be in the business sense of things. And that's kind of where I decided to kind of pause, go back to school, and kind of like identify the areas that I needed to be stronger at and come to the table where I had more confidence just based on some textbook type of things. But at the end of the day, like I had so many questions that I went to MBA that it was a very fruitful experience for me. Really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it way more than my undergrad, mainly because I had so many questions that needed to be answered. So loved it. And I apply a lot of it, through my career at Ancilla Ventures. And it's definitely been a good backbone of just understanding the basics of an operations and financial stuff, back office, HR, whatever. Like it just put me in a better situation than I would have been if I didn't have it.
And what's your take on getting an MBA today? I would assume, it's been a while since you got yours. I actually have an MBA as well. From my perspective, it does seem that MBAs are becoming more diluted today, right? There's almost an oversupply of MBAs, which I think diminishes their value a bit. I don't know if you would agree with that, right? I mean, if thousands of people are obtaining their MBA and you're trying to apply or, become a partner at a company like Ancilla Ventures, it just doesn't seem to carry the weight it does that it used to. So I don't know if you agree
From
with
my
that or.
perspective, well, I think it all depends on what's kind of your motivation of getting in. If it's not to really learn, because maybe your motivation is to help elevate your career mainly on paper, right? And I have, when I went back, there was many different people there with different reasons, and some literally went from bachelor's to master, and some went like me. They were curious. They had a lot of questions they need answered, and they did it for themselves more than they did for credentials. And then some did it because like the company was paying for it, right? And they're like, well, why not get it? And that, why not, right? If it's company's paying for it, you might as well take advantage of it. So I think it depends on what's kind of your reasons for it. If your reasons are like you really have curiosity and you really want to really be highly educated in a way that you don't have it now, I think it's tremendous value because I think you personally look at it with a different light, and you really maximize whatever you can. But if you go in with other, like if it's a credential boost and all that stuff, yeah, I think that at this point, sometimes it's almost like you have to have it because others are having it. If you want to be competing with the same people, you have to have it. And I think that's where, unfortunately, that becomes like a diluted point of view because maybe you're doing it for the wrong reasons. At least the reasons that I don't think I do it just for those reasons. I do it because I really find there's huge value of education. And I'm challenged by those that go right from their bachelor's to master's, at least for a business degree, because I don't think they have enough questions to be answered. And I don't think they know enough to know what they should be asking questions about. So I found a few people that were there. They got it. They did well. But I'd be curious if they could have gotten more out of it if they came to the table with some experience.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So maybe I don't know if you look back on your experience, if you can kind of articulate maybe like the top three things that it taught you that you now apply today in your role at Ancilla Ventures.
I think from purely accounting financials, it helps me understand things that, how to maximize the opportunity of interest rates, right? And where do you, pull the appropriate levers. And it just kind of makes you think with those types of lenses. So those types of classes help me kind of iron out things I wouldn't have thought of before, like organizational development, teamwork. Some of those things I learned at Accenture, but I think um, with the MBA, I think they kind of like taught it in a different way and know that you can wear different hats and still be successful. I think like I'm trying to think marketing actually was a big one for me too. If I didn't go back, I think I'd be starting from ground zero and not really know enough to know what I should be doing. I'm not a marketing expert by any stretch of the matter, but I'm not naive on it either. And so I think that helped equip me to understand kind of like how it all kind of works and how kind of supply demand kind of works and how does marketing play a piece of that and how does marketing play a piece in sales and how do they kind of work together. So I think some of that stuff helped educate and bridge the gap of those certain areas in a company and how they kind of work together. And it also helps me find the right people too, when from a purely resource perspective. It helps me maybe identify who's more appropriate for my company than maybe if I didn't have that.
So maybe we could kind of pivot to, like what you are building within Ancilla Ventures. And when I hear ventures, it makes me think that it's a portfolio of companies that you're managing. Is that a fair statement, or is it truly just ReadyList or just one company, or Ancilla Ventures is one company, what does one thing, just so I can understand that in more detail?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We used to be called Ancilla Partners, and that was when there was a few partners of ours. And now like when it kind of I decided to rebrand it 2 years ago when we were recruiting because many of the people that were interested in our company are asking the question of, oh, where are the other partners or who else? And I'm like, well, there's only just me. And, I had to answer that question. And then it kind of made me think, well, maybe it's a good opportunity at a 15-year mark to rebrand. So we went through the exercise of rebranding and figure out what resonates. And a lot of it really stemmed down to understanding what is my why, like what am I all about? And try to make sure that the company, kind of the branding and the taglines are wrapped around what I believe as a CEO and president, because like I'm the one that has to drive this thing and have passion for it, and kind of made me rethink and refocus. Ventures kind of came out because I have the thought of continuously taking people's other ideas, that come to the table, finding those people that don't know how to start a company, but have an idea and they don't know how to nurture it. And I feel like we've had enough experience with, like, ReadyList was an example. There was another company that we spun off that its own company called Fort Health. We did another one that we spun off. So we've done a few in the duration of Ancilla that I kind of felt like we kind of knew how to take an idea, put it to production, put marketing and sales around it, and then spin it off. So that's kind of where the ventures came about. And then what I wanted to start doing is not just taking other people's ideas, and then eventually start to get our own R&D and do the same thing ourselves, and then be able to do that model. And that's where the ventures kind of comes into play. There is be able to take more products and it starts spin off different companies off Ancilla Ventures, and have this Ancilla Ventures be more the holding, the background company to help support these other companies that are out there. And that's kind of what's going on with ReadyList right now. ReadyList is a brand name, but Ancilla Ventures kind of helps support, backs up that company.
You're almost acting as, are you providing any sort of capital or financing through Ancilla Ventures, or is it more just advisory, like helping
We
the
provide
companies
the
get off the ground?
technology know-how, we provide the sales and marketing. ReadyList itself is the brand, and if anything, it's probably more of a product brand now than it is anything else anymore. It used to be its own little thing where we had some people that were actually employed by that, and we've kind of scaled that back to make it a little more simple, and now pushing that as its own brand. But basically, everything is kind of being driven by Ancilla at this point.
Okay. And can you maybe speak to a couple of the most successful companies or where the brands that Ancilla is helping grow and nurture or owns a portion of? Like what spaces are you involved in? I know you're involved a bit in the healthcare space. Is it really just all healthcare
It's all
or
healthcare. Yeah, it's
okay.
all healthcare. And the only one that we're actively pushing at this point, because I kind of wanted to step back a little bit because I wanted us to make sure we push on ReadyList as a product brand in a very successful manner and not get diluted by too many things. So we kind of actually stepped back. So when we did the rebranding 2 years ago, I had a vision of doing many things eventually. And what I ended up doing is we kind of spread ourselves too thin. So we kind of stepped back, say, okay, let's just make sure ReadyList is successful enough to be on its own and then to start the next one. In terms of previous ones, those are kind of like spun off where they're their own thing now. Like Ford Health Group is its own thing, has its own CEO, is backed up by VC. And now I'm just a shareholder. Ancilla itself proper doesn't do anything. I'm just a shareholder that benefit from whatever fruits they bear from their own just destiny. But the venture part of it, it was just kind of the know-how of how we've kind of done each one of these things. And then what I wanted to try to do is start to do more of this internally and drive some of that in the future. So I kind of feel like we're kind of like restarted in some ways, rebooted in 2 years ago of this model. So I'm kind of like an infancy stage of it, and I'm trying to prove it back out with ReadyList. And then once that has its own legs, move on to the next one.
Got it. And why have you chosen to focus on healthcare specifically? Any reason for that? Maybe strategically or looking
Well, I
back in
mean,
your career?
yeah, so Scylla, when it was found by working with a nonprofit collaborative focused on healthcare quality. And they needed the ability to bring in healthcare data that came from each of the hospital health system and be able to produce these quality metrics to push back out to these hospitals to measure how well they're doing from either processes or outcomes and the like. And part of it was, my previous partner just happened to have them as a client in his previous job. And then he asked, could he spin off to his own company, bring this client with him? Because he personally had passion towards seeing that there's an opportunity and there's a gap in the market of understanding this. And this is like 15, 16 years ago. Things have changed now. But back then, there just wasn't much transparency on healthcare quality. No one really wanted to talk about it. It definitely was not as public as it is today. And I think there was just that opportunity. Moving, kind of getting to future or current state, I think through the 15, 16 years we've been doing this, we're kind of still doing some of the quality stuff with some of our business partners out there, but I'm more trying to focus on what are some of the gaps out there in healthcare because previous to Ancilla, with Accenture as an example, I was more in the manufacturing space or retail space, and I really didn't touch healthcare at all. So when I got into Ancilla, that was like my first opportunity to understand a little bit about healthcare. And as I kind of evolved, what I found is there's just major opportunities there, in my opinion. I think that healthcare is like an industry that is still not tapped in as much as other industries. I think manufacturing, banking, and the financial markets, any of those are in a very different state, in my opinion, than healthcare is. So I just feel like there's just more opportunity, especially for the tech side of the world, to be able to help out in areas that has been neglected. I don't think until meaningful use and the high tech stuff from CMS came out, basically what 10 to 12 years ago, it wasn't a major push for tech. It was a lot of paper stuff going on, and nowadays it's definitely a different story, but I still think it's not where it still could be.
Do you also look at healthcare from obviously an enormous financial opportunity. I mean, I work in the space as well, and I think just from if you look at the United States GDP, an enormous amount of our GDP is tied up in healthcare. Is that another reason that you've chosen to kind of stick with it? Is because a lot of money is spent in healthcare?
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not going away, and it is something that is needed, and it still has a lot of opportunity to be better. I think that it's got to be better of how we service our patients. It has to be better on how we work with our payers. It has to be better and how our employers kind of help encourage their employees to be better fit and the like. I mean, to me, like, it's an industry that it's never going to die. It's just going to change and evolve. And I think there's just more upside for opportunities, because I do think that we have challenges in the US that still are not fixed. And I think that companies like mine or similar can help that, and the thing is there's just so many little pockets that can be fixed, and gaps that can be resolved. And why not take advantage of that? I don't think there's many players out there in the healthcare industry as there is compared to other industries at this point. There's a lot, but I don't think it's as much as it's out there. Like, you have to kind of understand healthcare a little bit. You have to be a little bit niche. You have to understand the data, how the workflow is, how they kind of operate in general. It's not the same as a normal company out there. And I think you have to understand that to be able to work with it.
Do you also have any concerns from a sustainability perspective for healthcare in the United States specifically? Okay, it's such a big portion of our GDP because delivering healthcare is so expensive here. I've had conversations in the past where, there's others have raised concerns that, you get to a point where somebody has surgery or somebody's hospitalized and they're footed with a multi-$1,000 bill, and they just say, sorry, I can't pay this, right? And so now the hospital's sitting on a bunch of bad debt. They can't collect because it's so expensive. I mean, how do you look at that problem, right? Because if you go back to when the ACA was implemented, I mean, year over year, healthcare has outpaced normal inflation. And I mean, if we continue on this trajectory, I don't see how it's sustainable. But I don't know
I don't disagree.
how you look at that.
No, I don't disagree at all. I mean, I look at it personally, and I scrutinize a lot of my stuff, as with my family, of, is it overusage, right? I think sometimes when you're like seeing, one is like, should I be going to the doctor? I don't know. Some people go to a doctor when maybe they shouldn't have to, but they do it because maybe they're told to do it, or they're just, I don't know, they're used to doing it. And then sometimes doctors, unfortunately, and this is just an opinion of mine, are put in situations of risk. So sometimes they're overly cautious, and sometimes they overorder, and sometimes there's like overage of things that end up driving up costs that may or may not be necessary. But because of the risk, they want to protect themselves. They want to protect the fact that they have a career they want to protect. They also want to protect their patient. They don't want to feel bad that maybe they could have gone that extra step to prevent something major from happening. And it's that balance of, do I request this order for this additional types of checkup or procedure or whatever? And if I don't do that and they come back, maybe they'll be harmed worse than not. So it's this delicate balance. But I think sometimes they err on the side of too much. And this is, again, my opinion, but not all of them like that. But I do think that that play of risk that ends up putting the provider in a situation where things are maybe overused. And patients are typically going to trust their doctor, which they should. They should trust their provider. But they should also, in some ways, challenge them too, just make sure they understand what they're doing and making sure that they feel comfortable that's the right decision for them, because it is their decision at the end of the day of what they should or should not do. And I think somehow we have to just change the way we think about those types of things and try to minimize some of that risk to the providers, and maybe some of that would go down, and maybe some of the unnecessary costs will go down as well. But at the same time, I do feel bad for the providers. I would not want to be in there. I feel like the providers in probably one of the worst situations, and the patients that are secondary to that, because they're the most vulnerable. They're like the in-between of everything. And I feel like no matter what, sometimes they're not always going to win with their decisions, and that's just not a great spot to be in.
And I think you touched on providing quality data or transparency in data for hospitals, and getting healthcare up to speed from the technology perspective. And I think kind of to that your last point, a big issue is that both the patient and provider have no idea of what the total cost is of the services that they're ordering, right? So
Mhm.
the patient goes and sees a specialist and they pay their $40 copay, but they don't realize that the insurance company is being billed $700. And so overall, the cost is actually $700, but the consumer is only seeing $40. So, I mean, that doesn't disincentivize or cause them to, like step back and think like, oh, this is going to cost $700. Do I really need to do it? And then, when patients are or providers are referring patients, they just say, I know that Stanford provides the best cancer care, but they don't even know that, okay, you just cost the insurance company hundreds of thousands of dollars when you could have sent it to another specialty cancer provider that is a quarter of the cost, right? So I think that's a big issue as well, is that there's no insight into the true cost. And I think that drives a lot
100%.
of it
I
as well.
don't think I don't think a lot of patients ask the question on it. They'll ask the question when they purchase something at Best Buy, right? They'll look and know
Mm-hmm.
exactly what they're paying for, and then they'll shop that out to Amazon or whatever, right? There's little bit more due diligence on that front. But when it comes to healthcare, unfortunately, it's not so transparent. It's not so, but they can ask before doing something like, okay, well, what's that going to cost me? And if they don't get the answer, then that's a shame because they should be able to understand roughly what's going to kind of cost them. I do think high deductible plans though kind of help a little bit of what you said, because I do think that if you don't have a high deductible, I think that's where it gets abused a lot, is like they're just doing things and hey, it's only $40 for me, like whatever. When the high deductible, when you have to go and meet your whatever that is, 6 or 12,000, whatever you're at, you might be thinking a little bit harder about, well, okay, should I be going there? Is it better to keep in network? Because that's the other thing. Are you in network, out of network? Do you understand what that all kind of means? And I think a lot of patients, I should say a lot, there's many patients out there that probably don't even understand what that even means. They'll just go there because they're told to go there, or someone else told them they should go there, and then they trust them. And a lot of it's that trust factor too, is who do they trust to actually go to? And a lot of it's word of mouth, or it's being told by a provider.
So I want to talk about, you say that you kind of fell into healthcare in a way, but now you've kind of seen a lot of the opportunities to start different companies to help improve the sector as a whole. Maybe you could speak to some of those opportunities you've seen, and then maybe if you want to talk to specifically the opportunity or the problem that ReadyList solves.
Sure. Yeah, so we're not going to probably try to compete out there with any HR for that matter. I think there's enough out there that we're not going to be able to meet that similar demand. So we kind of focus on more of the service side, the support side, anything that may not as visible, I guess, to others, but that requires a little more due diligence and work. So our goal is to be able to help provide solutions that the back end service side is deficient on, and continuously work on that element. And we also want to focus mainly on the hospital aspect at the moment. And that's mainly because I think there's just opportunities there. I think the value is better there than like a clinic, for example. A clinic sometimes is too small, and they're not going to want these extra things that maybe it sounds like a good idea, but they're not going to want to pay for it because their margins are pretty thin, and they're going to do things that are a little bit more prudent just because of the cost. Hospitals, on the other hand, they just have so many different areas, so many different departments, and there's so many moving parts that they in some ways are equipped to be able to entertain solutions, if you will. And a lot of it's unfortunately trying to get on the radar and trust, honestly, because there's a lot of hospitals are a little bit fatigued by being bombarded by many companies of, this will save your world, and they'll offer all these solutions, and sometimes they're fatigued with too many things out there. They don't know what's good, what's not good, or they've gotten burned by certain companies or products, and then they're cautious. At least that's what we've been finding. So we're trying to just make sure that we provide things that, start out in a lower cost, kind of build up that trust, help them understand that we're there to partner with them and to help them be successful, and to kind of eliminate anything that we find to be unnecessary services that can be done automatically. If it's being done manually, but there's not a lot of value, that's where we try to say, well, what can we can do to replace that with something that has, to then push their labor, focus on more of the valuable type of stuff, which is to help make sure the patients are treated, make sure that the patients are managed in a way that if nurses and alike are spending more time doing things that are not patient centric, then they're really not able to do what they should be doing, is just treating the patients. So ReadyList specifically, we offer a product that helps out kind of turn over rooms in a more efficient way. And a lot of that's driven based on two elements. One is on the infection side of the world. We want to try to minimize any hospital impacted infections that, from one patient to the next. And the only way you can do that is by having a objective cleaning protocol that is routinely done the same thing over and over again, and then create accountability to those that are actually doing the turnovers. So we offer a product that helps kind of do that. What we ended up creating this past month or two, pushed out live, was called Rapid Service Responder. And that one's more driven on kind of like the visitors and the patients, that when you're in a restroom and things are either not replenished, or there's a sink is broken, or whatever, there's something wrong with its facility, is giving the opportunity for that particular visitor to a QR code that alerts the nearest cleaner to be able to address the situation, or maintenance person right away, versus it being sent to a supervisor, of which he or she may not even be in the area to even understand there's a problem. There's a major delay, and there's unsatisfied people out there that are not happy with things not being addressed. So we try to offer those types of things and make the hospital be able to service their patients and visitors in a better way. And end result is to kind of reduce those infections that are being kind of drawn from one person to another person to another person. Second element is really labor. When it really comes down to it, you probably have heard about or seen it, is there's just a shortage of labor across the board of hospitals that we've seen, and trying to keep either good talent on the higher end, or just keeping people that are actually turning over rooms, is very challenging, because there's just not as many people out there that want to do that job anymore. So it requires kind of an application to kind of minimize some of the unnecessary things that a person would do, and now they can actually have electronics do it for them, some type of technology solution to do it for them. And then if you have to train all these people, trying to get the learning curve better and increase the learning curve of getting people to know what they're doing faster and hold them more accountable faster as well. That's kind of what ReadyList has been focused on, is kind of like that service side of the world, and how to kind of help out the labor shortages as well as infection control.
Yeah. So I think a lot to unpack there. I think maybe back to your first response of just identifying opportunities in hospitals, like basically what I heard is improving efficiencies and things like that. And I'm curious, since you work with hospitals so often, I mean, do you have any insight into why care provided in the hospital setting is so expensive, right? Like, I know off the top of my head, depends on the hospital, but let's just say you're hospitalized, you spend the night in the hospital. I mean, that's at a minimum going to cost $4,000 to $5,000. And to somebody that's not familiar with the healthcare space, will kind of gawk at that number, right? So I'm curious, maybe from your perspective, is why is that care so expensive, right? Like, if you're just in a bed at a hospital being attended to by a nurse, why does that cost $5,000? And then, God forbid, you're hospitalized for a week or a month, and then next thing you know, you're looking at a multi-$100,000 bill, which, how can somebody pay that? So I'm just curious, like, your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably many factors there. And again, this is just an opinion on this one is some of the newer hospitals are not cheap, like to build, and just the pure overhead of a given hospital is not cheap. Two is some of the hospitals that are more on the newer side of the world, bigger rooms, right? They're more luxurious. They're just better. They're more a nice hotel room, to be honest with you, than they were back in the day. And a lot of that's probably driven on competition. There's a lot of health systems out there trying to compete for patients to go to their facility to be either have surgery or to be managed in their care. I think the hospitals and health systems are kind of pushed to kind of elevate their game, but that there's a cost to it as well. So I think infrastructure and just pure overhead of the facility itself is one element of it. I do think that the labor cost also is high too. The competition of trying to keep really good talent, on the high side of the providers, administrators, down to, the service support people, they're all competing for the same resources. And I think a lot of it is really the supply demand of what's going on right now. There's just that shortage that ends up pushing up the cost of keeping good talent. And you kind of wrap all that together plus the overhead, I think that just drives up the healthcare cost. It's possible, that the other elements could be is do we have too many people trying to service a patient? Maybe. Now, that one's a tough one because I was just at a hospital this week after my mom had surgery, and I can't say that I thought there's too many people in the room. So it's like, maybe there isn't that going on. That one's hard to tell. But I really just think that the labor cost is high based on competition. And then, in general, like you have a lot of technology out there, whether it's the technology of software or just technology of whether it's radiology, any of those types of equipment, it's expensive. All that stuff that they have to have is very expensive for them to offer, but they have to do it. I mean, if they want to be competing with their other health systems out there, they have to offer the same types of technology. Otherwise, they're going to be out. They're going to be obsolete, and no one's going to go to that hospital. So the question is how do you resolve that? And I think the idea would be is if you can try to find ways to do things that require not as much labor cost. And granted, we have a labor shortage, but until that's kind of fixed, part of the issue is really not trying to eliminate labor. Part of it is trying to make sure we can service the patient better and more efficient. And I think that's a challenge of itself. So I think at this point, until they kind of have more labor or like more opportunities for labor to try to drive down that cost a little bit, it's probably not going to change anytime soon until that changes.
Yeah, I'm also curious, maybe your perspective on, we talked about it a bit earlier, right? The payer, the health insurance carrier funds a lot of that, right? When the doctor sends somebody to Stanford for cancer care, a lot of that burden falls back on the health insurance carrier. I'm wondering if like that knowledge from the contractor to the suppliers, you talked about the expensive equipment. I mean, how much of that is just inflated because they say, oh, essentially the health insurance carrier eventually will pay for that, or this is a hospital, this is healthcare, we know we can get more money, so we're gonna bump up our margins, we're gonna charge more because we can get away with it.
I'm sure there's elements of that. It's probably a little bit beyond my understanding, in that side of the world, but I wouldn't doubt that because there's probably administrators or those making decisions probably are not always equipped to understand whether that's a reasonable thing or not, or maybe there isn't enough competition for those types of equipment that they have no choice but to get it. Like it really just depends on what they actually are trying to get. And they're kind of put in a very bad position of, where's their negotiating power if there's not enough competition out there to help them through that, right? And if there is, there's probably only a handful, and they're probably all very similar prices when it comes down to it. So they're kind of vulnerable. I don't really know what a hospital can really do in that particular scenario. I think in some ways, I hate involving government. I don't think government, is always the right solution, but is there some type of controls that could be put in place to prevent those types of overinflation of equipment that puts these hospitals in a situation that they are in? Because at the end of the day, like their goal is to try to break even or make money. And I can't say the hospitals always make a lot of money. Honestly, like I think a lot of them are hoping for break even. So it really comes down to is there some type of controls that can be put in place to minimize these overinflated costs if that's what's going on?
Pivot back to ReadyList. So you talked a lot about kind of infection control. I think for somebody that's again not familiar with the space or working with hospitals would may find that surprising, right? Like you go to a hospital, right, to receive healthcare. You would not expect that you go into the hospital for another reason and leave with or I don't know if you would leave at this point, but come down with an infection that you didn't have before you entered the hospital. So can you maybe speak to why that's at a high level, why that's a problem for hospitals, or why that exists in a setting that you would expect to be clean and be a place where people get better and they don't end up coming down with something else?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it really comes down to is how disciplined is a hospital in managing the turnovers of their rooms, right? Are they using the appropriate protocols on a regular, consistent basis to be able to ensure that any given room, whether it's an operating room down to just a patient room, and if it's not being done consistently, and it's not being monitored and managed and inspected in a way that helps ensure that these things are clean to a point to minimize or eliminate infection, they're gonna be there, especially for, like when we went through COVID and all that stuff, like that was being transferred a lot, and they did a great job trying to minimize it when they start to get under control. But there was a point where they couldn't keep up. There was just too much going on that it was almost virtually impossible to try to minimize it. Now that things are a little bit more under control, at the end of the day, like if a hospital doesn't treat this serious in terms of turnover in a room, whether again it's an operating room or a patient room, in terms of making sure things are cleaned at the protocol that's a standard out there, they're susceptible to basically giving that to the patient, which is a shame because it's going to really hurt their brand a lot. It's also going to hurt their quality scores, could end up penalizing them. And sometimes it could even penalize the providers too, which is a shame, because sometimes the providers are relying that these things are being done correctly. They're like their job is to focus on the patient, to treat the patient, whether it's at the bedside or for the surgery. Everything around them is supposed to be supported by the hospital to make sure that it's done right. And if the infection part, whether it's not cleaning the equipment or the tools that are being used, or the bed is not clean enough, or the floors or the linens or the curtains, like all these things that can actually attract any of these types of infections, especially if you're in a discharge that was, unfortunately, a lot of fluids around it and the like, that if it stains on the floor, or all you have to do is touch certain curtains, touch the bathroom, touch anything that has not been cleaned, and then all of a sudden you put it on your fingers and you actually touch your eye, then you're going to get that, right? So I think that those that don't take that seriously, and I believe most do, I don't think anyone's intentions are ever there. I think it's a matter of, do they have a system in place that creates that control where they can manage it? In my opinion, at the end of the day, is if they're unable to manage it, your best intention is not going to get there. They have to have a system that is manageable. And I think having some type of solution or system that makes you manage by exception versus trying to manage everything, and you don't really know which one's the problem, which one's not. And you basically fall short on delivering to the patient what they deserve, which is a clean, non-infected.
And then what is your pitch to hospitals from an ROI perspective, right? Like what are the advantages of the properly managed infection control and then also working with you through ReadyList?
Yeah, I mean, infection control has been always our prominent one. It's a soft one, unfortunately, because like you can say, well, are you sure your software is really going to prevent it? It's like, well, I can't say anything will prevent it. Our goal is to minimize it to the point where you feel like you have a sense of control. So the ROI on that is, hopefully we minimize you getting, whether it's by CMS or whatever the payer is, because your infection scores are too high, or if you get audited, you can get highly penalized. But some of those penalties can add up very quickly, and that of itself could be its own ROI. what we've been doing more lately is piggybacking on the labor shortages as well, and knowing how to actually get an individual onboarded and be able to be effective in a quicker manner is important, because if you have a lot of rooms that are not being addressed as quick as possible, two things are happening. Either one is you're putting a patient in a room that maybe they shouldn't be in because it's not as clean as it should be, or two is you can't put them in the room because it's not clean, and that impacts the fact that you can't basically treat that patient, which hits the bottom line for the revenue perspective, right? So I kind of look at it as a cost saving thing from a labor perspective, and then I also look at it as a lost opportunity, especially like you're thinking about surgery, right? If they have a plan like 10 surgeries in a given day or 8 surgeries a given day, and they come in 5 in the morning for their first surgery, and 3 of the rooms are not prepped and ready and turned over, well, that will then push back that one surgery, and guess what, that surgery will never happen again, like in terms of that opportunity for revenue on the upside, right? You can't get that back, like it's gone. You may be able to make it up tomorrow, but that slot can never be made up. So that's kind of where that opportunity, at least on the top line of the thing, that if they can make sure that it's reliable and it's consistent and it's clean, a little bit of that is also what I try to pitch them as well. Is it's the top side as well as the bottom side.
And so as you look forward, what are your goals for ReadyList specifically? It looks like you've been running the company for quite a long time now. I mean, is it in a sustainable place? And you say, okay, I have good, work-life balance, it's making money, or are you foot on the gas pedal? Let's grow, let's develop new products, let's push to expand this nationally and sign up a bunch more hospitals and scale the team. What's kind of your mindset right now as the CEO?
The latter. I definitely think we're more in a growth mode at this point. We kind of rejuvenated ourselves with some new offerings or modules, as we call them, to kind of open up some entry points to hospitals to really get to understand who we are and at a lower risk and a lower price point. But our goal is to definitely evolve the product and offerings and constantly keep the foot on the pedal, as you said, and try to grow the company and grow resources. Right now, we span all of our clients are kind of across the, we have a few on the west side, and then a few on the east side and in the middle. So our goal is to keep on focusing on a broader aspect of the U.S. And in theory, we could technically go outside the U.S. I just haven't got to that point yet. I kind of want to focus on what we know we have more control over. But in theory, what we do offer can be expanded anywhere. It's not at all agnostic to just the U.S.-based hospitals.
And then just to kind of round out the conversation, just maybe some questions for you as a person, or as you think about your career. And I'm kind of curious, right? You talked about your earlier career, Accenture Consulting, got your MBA. I mean, did you, maybe at the beginning of your career, did you always know that you wanted to found companies and then also run them as CEO? Or was that developed later in your career? And then what kind of drove that inspiration, right? Because I understand it's not for everybody, right? You bear a big burden when running a company, and why have you decided to bear that burden?
Yeah, I think deep down I've always kind of knew it, like just based on going through school as my undergrad. I got the sense I've always wanted to take leadership roles in whatever organization I was a part of. I always liked to, and then when I got in Accenture, a lot of the things that I did there is I tried to teach as well, and I loved evolving people and kind of like getting them to know what I know. I like to educate them. And I just kind of like to see them grow. And I think I just like watching things grow and being a part of that and helping put them in situations to help grow a bigger, I guess, a bigger idea, if you will. So I think I always kind of had that in me. And I think what kind of like, I guess, confirmed it for me is when I went and got my MBA. That I think when I started to realize all the tools that now I have, and I can now take those tools and then align to what I actually have passion for, is to grow something. And started out with going with partners. It was a little bit lower risk from that perspective, but I can tell inkling in my mind was I love having partners, but I do kind of like driving things too with people. So whether it's with partners or not. I just have that passion, taking something and making more of it. And then just taking ideas. I love taking ideas or driving out ideas and collaborating with those ideas. I think some of those elements I didn't see when I'm in a big organization because it's just harder. It's harder to do some of those things. There's probably too many barriers sometimes in place or controls in place, which they're typically in there for a reason. I think when you're a smaller company or you at least you're able to pull any lever you want, it's empowering and it's fun. Like it's fun to know that this works out great, fantastic, I'm happy. If it doesn't work out great, well, I can just hold myself accountable, and then learn from it and move on. And I don't have to like get that caution point, like I feel like I can take a little more risk when I have the controls than if I didn't have the controls. I probably would take less risk, which I think I'm more of a risk taker at times with control.
And what would you say are the top three traits or skills you've had to learn to become that successful CEO and roll with the punches and take risks and fail and move on? I mean, looking back at, the last 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think having stamina and conviction, I think you have to be like, like resilient to the things that come up and don't let it kind of like set you back so far that you don't think you can move forward, right? So I think that being resilient to anything that comes up in front of you and then working through it, like I always feel like there's always a solution to everything. It may not a perfect solution, but there is always a way to get past any barriers that's in front of you. And you have to believe that. If you believe that there's going to be barriers preventing you from doing that, then you're preventing yourself in some ways. So I think you have to look with a lens of there's always a way to get through whatever situation you're in. I think you have to have a lot of energy. I think you have to have it internally. You can't rely on people to give you that energy. You have to have a little pilot inside of you, and you have to constantly, pour like fuel over that to kind of keep on igniting that. And that just requires you within to kind of get that out. And sometimes it means talking to people and get to know other people that help fuel it with you. But that still is on you. You can't expect others to push you. You have to be the one pushing yourself. And in some ways, you also have to push your team as well, because sometimes they'll need it and they'll need you as a leader to be able to step up and help kind of carry them over sometimes. So that's that. And then just nurturing as well, from at least a leadership perspective. Like I want people to understand that it's not all about like profit. Like profit is one element, it is also the experience. Like I'm here in this world to have an amazing experience and have an amazing life. And some of that is I like what I'm doing. Do I find value in what I'm doing? Do I think others find value in what I'm doing? And some of those are more rewarding than the profits of themselves. So I think having a combination and knowing, keeping your eyes wide open that it can't just be for the profit. It's got to be more than that. You got to understand what your why is and why are you doing this? And if you think it's just in the profit, that's not going to last very long because no one's going to want to follow you. And not many customers are going to really believe in your true intentions that you care for them. They're going to think with a different lens. So, and that's going to come out. I mean, it's going to be transparent. Like people can kind of see through that.
What's the best advice you've ever received throughout your career?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think, and that's probably like midway through kind of even that journey with Ancilla, is don't be passive on decisions at the end of the day. Like, like if you need to make certain decisions, be methodical about it, but do not delay. And that's one thing that I've learned in the last like 5 years is that sometimes we would overthink some decisions and sometimes we don't make decisions, and decisions not made are even worse than making a decision. So I think that trusting yourself, trusting your team, making deliberate decisions and being active on those decisions and not delaying, to me is like advice that I really carry well now. And I think we've pushed, like we use traction as a model. And I think that helps us push decisions and pushing on the right rocks at the right time and not delaying and holding ourselves accountable. And I think having a sense of it's okay if you make mistakes, move on, like learn from them, don't make them again, move on. but make decisions and don't be, fearful that it's the wrong decision, because they're all not going to be right. You just got to move on and keep on trying to do what's right for the future.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties into this last question here, just kind of around regrets or, would you change anything looking back at your career? Would you do anything differently knowing what you know now?
Yeah, the only thing I wish I did do was, and I see this with some peers of mine, is I wish I was a little deeper in my career in terms of whatever it is, like deeper in understanding industry, deeper in understanding an area of an industry. I think having that subject matter expertise, I think, is sometimes overlooked, especially when you're in the consulting fashion. Sometimes you're spread so thin where you're like, I was very good at breadth. I can do a lot of things and learn things really quickly and be able to go from one industry to another industry or another client, but I never got a lot of depth. And maybe I got depth in some technology, but I didn't get as much depth as I like to on some of the actual industry specific types of things. I wish I would have focused more on some of the depths of any business. And I think that would have, maybe, I don't know if the outcome today would be different. Maybe some of the things I would be doing would have been done sooner, if that makes sense.
And then any advice for entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs that may be listening to this as they think about or are on their entrepreneurial journey and thinking about trying to grow and scale something of their own?
Yeah, I mean, I think I already referenced this before, but like make sure you understand your why, make sure that's very clear to you of why you're doing this, because if you don't understand that, you could go down a path that doesn't make a lot of sense. Basically, if you understand the why, you have full control of your destiny. If you don't understand the why, you're going to be driven to your destiny and it may not be under your fruition, and I think really trying to hold conviction on where your path is and you taking control of that, I think, is the biggest thing. If you're being led by a lot of shiny objects and you're not being focused, I think that'll end up hurting you in the long run, essentially. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing I would say, is just understanding your why, and also know you're not going to be able to get everything done. So shoot for, like, I always say is like, don't shoot for perfection, like shoot for excellence is kind of the other thing I would think about. Is excellence is evolving. Excellence is never going to stop, right? So if you always shoot to try to be better than you were yesterday, that's better than trying to shoot for perfection, because perfection is virtually impossible. And you're going to spend a lot of unnecessary time on things that may or may not even matter.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And so I think that is a great way to kind of close out the conversation. So, Alan, I want to thank you for taking the time for being on the show. And to close us out, I will give you the floor. Where can people find you and more about the companies that you're building?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Connor. Thanks for having me on. I can be website ancillaventures.com or ReadyList.com or LinkedIn. You can search me on LinkedIn as well under Alan Cooper. And then we also just introduced a new website called EVS Navigator, and that's kind of tailored towards kind of the directors and managers and the supporting systems of hospitals, that if they need some just coaching advice, I'm kind of offering two coaching free offerings of just, if you have situations where you're trying to figure out how to manage your team a little bit better, or you're just challenged by a situation, I'd say, connect with me and we can probably talk through some things and kind of get you on the right path. So, but at the end of the day, I believe in people, believe that people evolve, and I think you got to believe in yourself. So kind of appreciate your time and having me on.
Yeah, thanks again, Alan. I appreciate it and best of luck.
Thank you.